All right, so in this video, we are going to be talking about different types of open science publications. So you're probably familiar with journal articles. You may have had to read some for some of your psychology classes already, but those are not the only ways to get psychological work out there. So we'll be covering pre-registrations, registered reports, and preprints. So pre-registration is one of the kind of most well-known types of open science publications. The idea behind pre-registration is to make your research plans known publicly before you even start doing your research. So it's kind of like the research proposals that you all are doing for class. You can motivate your research study, you provide your hypotheses, you outline your methods, you include your analysis plans, all created, all nice and typed up for other researchers to be able to reference and look at once you do your final study and actually have the data to analyze. So typically these pre-registrations are done before data collection begins. So before any data can even be looked at, the entire plan is laid out and it is time-stamped. So researchers will upload their pre-registrations to an online repository, such as the Open Science Framework, which offers a timestamp. So then when people want to go back and look at their pre-registration, they can see, okay, they actually did do this pre-registration before any of their data collection began. And so we know the steps that they were planning on taking, and we can compare that to the steps that they actually took. Just another note real quickly is that pre-registrations can also be done if the data has already been collected. So it can be used for secondary data analyses, but you have to be super transparent about what has actually been looked at in the data, and then what you're doing differently, and whether or not you've actually looked at the data in that different way. So one of the main components of pre-registration is that analysis plan, because we want to get rid of p-hacking, we want to get rid of harking, we need to make our analyses really clear. So there are two different types of analyses that can be included through pre-registration. So the first is a confirmatory analysis. So this is a direct test of the main hypothesis. This is, you are testing what you want to test. You are saying what test you're going to use, whether that's a t-test or an ANOVA or correlation, any of the things that we've talked about so far this semester. But you explicitly state which test you're going to use to test that main hypothesis. You identify the variables, all that. And that way you can actually confirm whether or not your hypothesis may be true. On the other hand, there are also exploratory analyses. So this is when you have your results, you do your confirmatory analysis, maybe you find something you didn't expect. So you want to go and explore your data a little bit more. This can create hypotheses for future studies. It can investigate unexpected or interesting results. But what's important is that you cannot claim anything you find during an exploratory analysis to be true. And that's because it wasn't predicted at the beginning of the study. That's an issue of statistics we won't get into, but there is this difference between confirmatory analyses and exploratory analyses that's very important, and that comes from pre-registering your study. You can include both confirmatory and exploratory analyses in your final manuscript. It's just crucial that the distinction is made. So if you're doing an exploratory analysis, including a simple phrase such as, an exploratory analysis found that X, Y, and Z, that lets other people reading your paper know that that particular test is not confirmatory and that it needs to be investigated further in future studies. So what are the benefits of pre-registration? Well, again, researchers are human. and our memories are imperfect. So sometimes it's really nice to have a pre-registration written, time-stamped, so you know exactly what your thoughts were along the way. You know what your hypotheses were, you know what tests you were planning on running, and that plan is there for you and already set. It also pushes you to think through all the steps clearly. You have to decide which analyses you're going to do. Maybe you have to decide between two analyses, and so you have to pick one from the beginning. It's a really good thing for trainees or students to do, again, because it forces them to push through all the steps of the research process and kind of figure out their entire research plan from the beginning. It's really great when working with collaborators because the decisions are made from the start. And so that way, when you get to that final analysis stage, you don't have the arguments about which analysis to run. And so this prevents p-hacking in a different sort of way. And then lastly, it adds weight to the claim of your research paper because you are able to point to the fact that you had this hypothesis from the beginning and that you did the correct analyses to address that hypothesis. And in fact, those analyses are confirmatory. So pre-registration may sound like quite a lot. And so there are even some researchers who have concerns about pre-registration. For example, they may think that pre-registration takes a lot of time. And it does. There is time involved in doing it, but it actually saves you time when you're analyzing your data. So it kind of just moves the time from the end of the project to the beginning of the project, and then more or less it's the same overall. Some research may think that pre-registrations are too restrictive because there's that difference between confirmatory and exploratory analyses. They worry that they won't be able to explore their data at all. And as we stated, that's not necessarily the case. You're still allowed to do those exploratory analyses. They just have to be labeled as exploratory analyses. And then other researchers may worry that pre-registrations don't fit their research. So for example, last week we talked about single case studies or small N designs. And so those, they may have a slightly different structure. You know, decisions are made based on the data that's seen, how the treatments are going, etc. But you can still include a plan of how you're going to approach different scenarios. So the purpose of a pre-registration is to include as much information as you can, but also be honest about things that you don't know and that you may have to address when they arise. All right, so that's pre-registration. It's a big chunk of open science publications. The next type is registered reports. So registered reports are kind of like pre-registrations on steroids. So it's a two-step process. The first is submitting an introduction and methods to a journal for peer review. So you're basically taking your pre-registration and asking other scientists to look at it. At this step, your manuscript, your paper, could be provisionally accepted. So saying, yes, we'll publish your paper no matter the results if you follow the study design that we approved in this first stage. And then you go on, you collect your data, you write your final report, and then it's peer reviewed again to make sure that your conclusions are sound based off of your analyses, which were already approved, and then it's published. So it's right, there are a lot of similarities between registered reports and pre-registration, but registered reports allow for more feedback from peers, from other scientists. Pre-registrations aren't always looked at by others. And so there are more opportunities to improve your study design. And also you can put it on your CV sooner, which is a slight bonus, for example, for researchers who are trying to get promoted, trying to find a job. And then lastly, we have preprints. So preprints are sharing a manuscript before it's actually published. So the idea behind preprints is to get research out into the world more quickly because the publishing process can take months for the reviews to come in, months for revisions. Maybe there's a second round of reviews. So it's quite a long process, but preprints lets you put your research out into the world much sooner. And often preprints are open access, and so they're not behind a paywall, which addresses the issue of accessibility that we touched upon earlier. So often people post preprints even after their paper has been accepted in order to increase accessibility. With preprints, you can also get more feedback on your paper. So when you submit to a journal, you get maybe 2 or 3 reviewers who are looking at your paper. But preprints, basically anyone can look at them, anyone can give you comments on them, and so maybe you're getting more relevant information for your paper. And then also another cool feature of preprints is that you can update the preprints with any changes or additions to your manuscript after you go through the review process. So they're kind of like living documents that get the findings out into the public sooner, quicker, and cheaper. Okay, in the next video, we are going to be hitting open materials as part of open science.